I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone. My name is Christoph, for those of you who don't know, and welcome to the 22nd Vancouver Psychedelic Meetup. I hope you guys have had a great year and have had a strong start to 2021. I'm excited to have everybody here, and it's great to see some new faces. We have a special guest today, Erik Davis. He's a popular psychedelics author and journalist, and he's going to be in a conversation with Tim. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce them in just a little while. We're just going to go through a couple of announcements, a few housekeeping things first. So first, I want to just mention to everyone that we do have a group chat. So if you haven't already, please message me so that we can get you into that chat. This chat is a place we can keep the conversations around psychedelics and all things surrounded going. It's a lot of place where we have a lot of fun and a whole bunch of people get to come into the community and ask questions and just be part of all of this conversation and everything. So again, just shoot me a message and make sure you have the Telegram app downloaded and we can get you in. As well, I want to mention for those of you who are going to have questions to ask after today's discussion, we have a Q&A afterwards, so you can ask all your questions at that period. And we're going to have Ken, our moderator, who's going to go through the code of conduct in just a short little while, and he's just going to go through the best way to ask questions and also any issues around privacy and things like that. As well, I want to mention that our next meetup is also, we've got a speaker planned for. We're going to have Blake Rupert. He's going to give a talk on psychedelic Buddhism, on quitting suffering, discovering freedom, and surf uncertainty. So we're going to have the event page up in the next couple of days, so look for that, and we'll be sending out an email for that. So hope to see you guys there. So before we get started, I just wanted to make a special announcement. And I wanted to appreciate a little bit about our journey and our growth as a community and where we started. So we were just a small group of us that met up at a coffee shop, just wanting to talk about psychedelics and all things related to psychedelics. And we found meetup after meetup that we kept outgrowing our coffee shops, and we continued to have to find new coffee shops because we just kept growing and we couldn't fit. It would not accommodate us. So we even got to the point where we were just wondering, like, are we even going to find a coffee shop big enough after COVID? I mean, I guess we'll have to find out. But it's been a tremendous journey, and it's been an absolute blessing to be sort of part of all this with all of you guys. And it's just been a joy to have those interactions individually and be able to talk to everyone, get to know each other on an individual level. And we've done so much just in terms of all the things that we've been able to done, COVID notwithstanding, all the group hangouts, the beach hangouts, and like the retreat, we've had like a book club and a psychedelic calendar that we did. We've done like movie showings, and there's just been such a community and so many things. We've come such a long way from where we first started. And I mean, that's why essentially I'm proud to announce that the Vancouver Psychedelic meetup is now the Psychedelic Society. So we wanted to get a name that reflects sort of where we're going and what direction and what sort of we've become. And we want a name that reflects the over 700 beautiful, creative, and curious minds that are exploring their consciousness and healing their trauma and living life to the fullest. So with that, I want to thank you guys for being here and welcome to the Psychedelic Society. So with all this, we've been working on a new logo, and I'm going to pass it on to Peter, who's just going to go over some of the elements that we've been bringing into this and everything surrounding that. So I'll just have Peter come on.
Thank you so much, Christoph. I'm super excited to be here and that so many of you could join us for the 22nd meetup. So we knew we couldn't rebrand ourselves without coming up with a logo. So we went to work searching for some designers. But before doing so, we kind of wanted to ask ourselves, what does the Psychedelic Society represent, right? Whether or not we're interested in psychedelics for healing, for personal growth, for just curiosity or fun, it is our openness to experience and learning about each other that kind of brings us together. And so some of the key principles that we felt define the Psychedelic Society is like a sense of sacredness or the radical authenticity that we have with each other, the trust that we have in each other, sort of the willingness to kind of dive into the difficult parts and sort of just the curiosity for the weird things. And so we use these principles to help define our symbolism. And obviously, kind of at a surface level, we could have just incorporated a mushroom or some sort of sacred geometry and kind of tether ourselves to the cliches of the past. But we wanted to kind of do something a little bit more outside the box, something, new, something that isn't so kind of the same old, same old. So we kind of came up with two symbols that represented the Psychedelic Society. So one was, we wanted to still have some basis in geometry. So we were thinking, what's kind of a shape that represents psychedelia? And it's the triangle. So it represents kind of like a unity, a base. It's kind of like a foundational basis. It's a sense of simplicity from which complexity can emerge. So that's the one kind of thing we wanted to maybe incorporate into our logo. And then the other one is jellyfish. So we thought of a jellyfish because it kind of represents this sort of intuition, this sort of sensitivity, because it doesn't even have a central nervous system. It's like a decentralized nervous system, but it's still, when you look from a farther, when you look from far away, you can see that there seems to be like a level of organization to the jellyfish and their colonies and everything. And they also, they come together and form these huge colonies in the sea, and they glow and they bring beauty to the world, and they bring light into the darkness of the ocean. So essentially these both, the triangle and the jellyfish, kind of represent a simple form from which complexity can emerge, and a type of bottom-up evolution. And so kind of like how a new world can emerge based on the foundational principles of the Psychedelic Society and groups like ours. And so hopefully we can come together and bring some light into the darkness, right? And so I just wanted to end by saying that this is a grassroots movement, and we would very much appreciate any donations to help share the cost of the logo and to allow us to take this, steps and further our growth. I think there's going to be an e-transfer link at the bottom of the meetup page that you can donate to. So any amount is appreciated. Thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Peter. And it's really good to just sort of understand the elements that we've been considering for these designs. We didn't have a chance to show them, but maybe we might be able to get that in a little bit later in the meetup. If not, I'll update the link so you can access the page event. So you'll go to the very bottom. We'll update the link over there so we can maybe, for those of you interested, want to take a look at them. We've had some really incredible sort of designs. Oh, I think we've got a few over here. So I don't know if you guys can see some of these. Yeah, there they are.
Sorry, this is not easy. I'm going to try to pull up a couple.
Yeah, yeah. There's been a number of sort of submissions we've been looking at, and we definitely would appreciate some feedback in terms of what sort of catches your eye and which ones you guys think maybe help represent what we're looking for and what we are. So we would certainly love to get feedback from the community on that. So excellent. Thanks for sharing those, Ken, and we'll try and get those up in links so you guys can follow up in the event page.
Just one quick question here. Would you be able to share like a poll or something like that after on the chat?
Yeah, what we're gonna do is so again, the best place to be able to do this, we are gonna be holding a poll, and it is gonna be on the chat. So everyone who wants to and like have their feedback heard, it's the best place and the best way we can also just get your perspective on it. So we'll do that in a few days once we give people a little time just to get into the chat. With that being said, I think what we'll do now is, just so we can keep things moving along, we're going to go to Ken. He's one of our group leaders, our group moderator, as well as event co-organizer. So he's just going to go over the code of conduct.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us over the rare sun we get out here in Vancouver. Just want to set some of the kind of, the code of conduct, just kind of the way things go here. The first thing is privacy. We will, we understand that this is sensitive and not everyone is out of the psychedelic closet. So we're going to do the best we can. But the couple quick things you can do is, if you don't want to have your whole name being shown, it is possible to rename yourself in Zoom. You can put just your first name or anything. Usually there's like a more button, or I think maybe it's in the participants panel. I can't give a Zoom lesson for every different platform right here live. It takes up too much time, but if you need to go to zoom.com, there's a help there, or if people can help each other in the chat. You can also disable your video, obviously, if you don't want your face to be seen. when we do the Q&A, like we are recording this, and when we do the Q&A, if you have a question, you can turn on your video and audio and ask the question. But if you do want privacy, formally we were talking, we would edit that out. Kind of our newer policy is if you really would like to have a question asked but be private, you can ask that by sending a message to me in the chat. I would ask to remind me if you don't want your name mentioned. Some people don't mind, but just to help me remember, ask to not have your name mentioned, and I will ask your question anonymously verbally to the presenters. Again, the default is to be muted. Please, we'll do our best to do that, but please just mute yourself when you need. And then when it is time for questions, you have about a half hour to figure out how to raise your hand. There is a raise hand button somewhere in there. Again, on the PC, I think it's in the participants panel on your phone. You can figure that out, or you can just pop in the chat, like if you can't figure it out, and I'll keep a list of who's going to be asking questions in order. And if anyone has a flaky connection, if you go down to the audio section around where the mute button is, you can change to a phone call where the meeting actually calls you on your telephone. So if you have bad Wi-Fi, you can still listen in there. We will take a quick bio break after the Q&A portion and then go into our breakout groups. There'll be like 6 to 8 people in a breakout room, and just free to talk about anything psychedelics, and that will go usually another hour, but potentially indefinitely. If people really want to go and hang and chat, you can do whatever you want, and that's all good. So if there's any questions, pop them into the chat around this kind of stuff, and we'll do our best. I'm going to hand it back to Christoph to announce our guests today.
Perfect. Thanks so much for going through that, Ken. So I just wanted to, get to our future discussion today. So we wanted to have this in a little bit more of a conversation format. So I'd like to introduce Erik Davis, and he's a leading commentator on psychedelic culture for over 20 years. He's an author, podcaster, award-winning journalist, and independent scholar. His latest book, High Weirdness, Drugs, Esoterica, and Visionary Experiences in the 70s, explores the lives of 3 countercultural icons of the 70s, Terrence McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, and Philip K. Dick, and the lessons that can be learned from the existential tightrope walk that comes with diving headlong into mind-altering experiences. And he's going to be in dialogue with Tim, who is a member of our community and has a deep-seated passion for psychedelics, the outdoors, and philosophy. He's a lifetime student and passionate about exploring psychedelics and adventure as a tool for finding deeper meaning in life. So thank you so much, both of you guys, for coming here and for doing this, and we really appreciate this. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Erik, thank you so much for joining us, first off. What draws me most to your work is the way you are able to explore and investigate some of the most interesting pockets of culture, but in a way that has kind of the rigor of an academic, but also in a way that's so interesting for the average person to read. So I thank you for that off the bat. I'd love to start off by thinking back to 2020 and all that occurred, and I'd love to get your take, or actually let's circle back a little bit. Do you want to share us a little bit more about how you got interested in this topic and what led to your publications like Technosis and High Weirdness?
Oh, sure. That's fine. Yeah, I mean, I've just been, interested in this domain since I was a teenager. And in some ways, I never really grew out of being a teenage stoner. I just got like better read and developed, more communication skills. But I'm still kind of fascinated with just this sort of raw, fresh, bizarre, modern encounter with these powerful substances and practices. So it's always been kind of part of my interest. And so I grew up in the 70s. So part of what attracts me to this topic is, on the one hand, it's kind of in some ways one of the wildest times in, modern history in terms of what happens after the 60s and people trying to recover meaning, and there's a lot of challenges politically, there's paranoia, there's environmental issues, there's a lot of things that kind of resonate with our current bummers, and at the same time things are really weird. People are going down their own rabbit holes, and religious groups and strange cults, and then these extraordinary kind of psychedelic experiences that that the people I'm writing about in the book have. And I think one way of tying it to 2020 is to just say that, you know, my use of the term weirdness is very intentional, because I'm trying to map out something about psychedelics, something about altered states, but also something about culture in general. And what I'm trying to point to is a place where the normal maps break down, things become unusual, anomalous, peculiar, possibly sacred, possibly mystical, but we don't really know. We don't really know about the reality of the supernatural. At least a lot of us don't. Some of us have strong beliefs. But for me, what's important to underscore is that even if we don't believe in the supernatural, even if we just think it's just this earth spilling through space-time with energy and consciousness woven together in time, that things get weird. And by that, it's no longer in the box. And when we have those experiences personally, or when the culture as a whole starts to go through a weird time, we all get to deal with it. We all got to surf it. We all got to figure out how to engage it. And so a lot of what I'm interested in this book is watching how these three very smart, very well read, very articulate gentlemen, all writers, all intellectuals of a sort of countercultural character, how they navigated their own experiences, not just of weirdness, but of high weirdness, meaning both high weirdness and extreme weirdness, like the kinds of experiences that can break your brain or can initiate so many synchronicities that you think you're going crazy, or possibly breaking through to another level of metaphysical reality, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Things where the normal plot breaks down. I'm not saying that these are necessarily desirable experiences that you want to pursue in your own personal lives, but in this case, we have the record of these guys wrestling with these experiences, trying to write texts and come up with language to navigate these experiences. So we can really look at them as kind of test cases. How do people navigate these really far out zones? And part of the reason for doing that is not just because it's interesting or they become models of a sort of both things to do right and things to do wrong. They all make mistakes. They all lose the plot in some ways. But I think it also serves as a more general way of talking about how do we navigate a world that is getting weirder and weirder, less predictable, more anomalous, changing more quickly, with less and less guideposts. And this is something we're all sharing, we're all trying to do together. So in a weird way, even though I was writing about the 70s, uh, and you know, it's mostly a historical book, although I do talk about the contemporary situation at the end. In a way, I ended up writing more about where we are now, and particularly in terms of Robert Anton Wilson, who, if you're not familiar with his work, he's very much worth checking out. But he was very interested in conspiracy theory as well as occult metaphysics and psychedelic weirdness and anarchic hippie politics and all sorts of crazy ideas. And he was a very brilliant man in a lot of ways. But his interest in conspiracy theory really ended up being much more resonant than I had expected when I was finishing the book, because by the time it came out, some of the things that he was talking about, in kind of a funny way, kind of a prankster way, like playing with the mischievous possibilities of conspiracy theory, started to become more and more a part of our toxic politics. And I suspect we might be going here, but for me, in a way, all of this came home with the images of the so-called Q shaman in Congress in the United States, in the Capitol building of the United States, because if you go back and study that guy, or if you've read articles about him, while he was in the Navy for a little while, they booted him out because he refused to get vaccinated. He's always had kooky ideas, but if you listen to him a year ago on a podcast, what you hear is of what to almost all of you would be a very familiar psychedelic, new age mystical warrior rap. Very familiar, you know, chakra, energy points, 5G, you know, the weird side of things, the kind of, you know, whatever some of us have ideas there. I'm not making judgments about what you should or shouldn't think, but what the point is that he was a very recognizable character. He would be someone who might show up at the Psychedelic Society. He'd had a little, maybe the tats are a little bit peculiar, but basically he was a familiar character to people in the scene. And then a year later, and there he is, a full-on convert to the QAnon worldview, and willing to break the law and do it in this very public way. So to me, that was like a wake-up call after I had already woken up to the problem, but it was like the loudest final wake-up call to the fact that contemporary psychedelic culture and the problems of conspiracy, of reason, of fake truth, of navigating multiple truth claims, the kind of weird mess we're in, at least in terms of media and the question of truth and politics, that psychedelics is as much a part of that as anything. It's not just a little pocket out to the side. And so there's an even greater urgency to wrestle with some of the issues that I see all of the guys in my book wrestling with, which is how do you balance being a modern person who respects science, rationality, technology, secular politics, secular political organization, and at the same time is exploring this adventurous, multidimensional world of enchantment and synchronicity and possibly extraterrestrial or ancient forces and entities, and how do you navigate both of these or through the interstices of these different ways of organizing the world. So it all became a lot more pressing, the project of the book, because of our kind of contemporary situation and the fact that now we can see, and some of us were tracking this a lot the last year, more than a year ago. I feel like me and a lot of people who kind of look at the scene, started to notice more and more people who were in a kind of psychedelic new age zone who got swallowed up in Q ideas. And it was like not just a few people, it was like very common phenomena. A lot of friends, a lot of anecdotal reports, people being unfriended on Facebook, arguments within psychedelic cultures, people, same thing in yoga scenes and other wellness scenes. So something really happened in sort of our psychedelic wellness culture that made these ideas, these memes, this game, essentially. To talk about QAnon as a game is a really important way of thinking about it, because it has a game-like structure, which is part of what makes it very attractive. But there was something about psychedelic culture as a whole that was allowing more and more people to be drawn kind of beyond the fun level of conspiracy, or even the, hey, we should really think about some of these other angles, questions of conspiracy, to being a full believer with changes in lifestyle, changes in relationship, essentially a kind of cult-like transition where you can't really talk to them anymore if you don't believe it. So that to me was like a wake-up call where it's a really good time to do some house cleansing in our own psyches and our own minds, because we're partly talking about reason and skepticism and analysis and what role they play in an engaged, courageous, exploratory psychedelic life. And that's, in a way, one of the main dynamics that I'm exploring throughout the book.
No, I remember in reading it, thinking about how wild of a time the 70s was, but at the same time realizing just how wild of a time we are in now. And I think you raised how things like the impeachment of Nixon and mass surveillance of counterculture was the types of things that led to that paranoia. And there's parallel forces today with the likes of kind of these digital companies, platforms, kind of canceling and showing just how much control they have over politics and business. It's very much just as weird, if not weirder. And so you spotlight it very well in your book. And you use the term of the existential tightrope walk between the visionary experience, so through the psychedelic lens of us entering into this world and the mystical and the sacred and the weird and whatever that is, with the rational skepticism of coming back down and integrating it with what waking reality is and how it kind of bleeds in between, and the tightrope walk is managing with that. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, this was a figure that that Terrence McKenna talks about, and Terrence and Dennis in their first book they wrote in the mid-70s. They talk about the shaman as being like a tightrope walker who can enter into the worlds of, essentially, if you want to go that far, you can call it insanity, which is a controversial way of looking at aspects of psychedelic experience, but can also be a clarifying one, meaning that it's not necessary that it's actually insane or that we are actually going insane in these experiences, but it helps to underscore just how challenging they can be. But in any case, the idea of the tightrope walker is you think about it, on our daily lives, we're on solid ground. Literally, we feel like we're on solid ground. We're always operating within gravity. We're always relating to the force of gravity and the force of being on solid ground. And then there we are, suddenly all of our familiar signposts are dissolving, all of our orientation, maybe even the orientation of our bodies is starting to melt down. And we're launched into these very unusual spaces. It can be frightening, it can be exhilarating. Well, one way of looking at that is like a tightrope walker, you're stepping off of solid ground. And now, you don't want to fall. You don't want to lose it. You don't want to fall into a paranoid experience. You don't want to fall into a nightmare experience. You don't want to fall into passing out or just losing control or just being a mess or being afraid or getting too absorbed in something or thinking that you're God. It's nice to avoid thinking that you're God, at least if you're holding on to it in an egoic way. It's nice to at some point go, I'm part of God, but to start to believe that your actual persona and ego is God it's a dangerous place to be, and it's not uncommon in psychedelic spaces to have these flashes of divinity. To my mind, that's another fall. So what you want to do is you're leaving solid ground. You are going into the wild chaos void, but you have the capacity to maintain a kind of upright clarity and a kind of balance as you move in. And you kind of imagine, well, how does a tightrope walker stay upright? They balance constantly. It's a little bit to the left, you go right. A little bit to the right, you go left. And so what that balance is, you can talk about in multiple ways, but in a way that really accords with what I've already been talking about is the balance between a sort of embrace of wonder and enchantment, like these worlds are opening, these beings are appearing, these different dimensions are beckoning, with a kind of, we can call it skepticism, you can call it a certain kind of distance or a certain kind of commitment to observation or a commitment to being aware of what's happening. And that's not necessarily the way people enter these spaces, because on the one hand, they can be so overwhelming sometimes that you don't have any choice in the matter, and that's fine. But there's sort of there's a deliciousness to submitting to full ecstasy. I'm out of my normal framework. I'm out of my normal control. I'm out of my normal neurosis, and I'm just going to go all the way. I'm just going to dive in. And I think for moments, for trips even, that's a powerful way to be. But I think as one matures in the practice, I think we end up talking more about a kind of balancing, a kind of navigation, rather than an ecstatic dissolution. Those ecstatic dissolutions can be remarkable and can still obviously come. So both during experiences and particularly afterwards, there's this quality of appreciating the multidimensionality, the non-ordinariness, the magic of these situations, while in a way remaining committed to a certain kind of upright clarity about what's going on. And that involves thinking about things from multiple angles, you know, from uh, especially in the integration process, you know, especially when you're dealing with situations like some of these things these guys are going through where there's synchronicities happening and it's like they're getting messages from aliens, and it's like even the next day there's patterns and signs and things are all pointing towards some deeper story that's happening, that kind of partly paranoid, partly enchanted, partly religious visionary kinds of experiences. That's partly why we do this, because it's fun, because it's juicy, because it's alive. But to my mind, and particularly having gone through this last year and seeing how people lose the plot in a real political way with real political consequences that are toxic for them personally and toxic for the society as a whole, I believe that it's important to sort of also underscore how much uh, a truly psychedelic path can still remain committed to skepticism, rationality, and critical thinking. That they're not opposed. That psychedelics are multidimensional. They're not a replacement of the rational world with a completely magical other world. They are an opening up, a resonating of where we already are, and that part of really honoring that is to keep your feet on the ground even as you dive into the heavens, and that tension, which is the tension of the tightrope walker, that tension that keeps you going, is something to cultivate as an active part of your seeking and exploration.
I think I'm trying to. I sense there's this dichotomy between the magical psychedelic experience and then also just the weirdness that's going on in the world we're living in right now. And I think so. For example, the fact that it's say more and more celebrities are coming out with weirder stances on controversial issues, whether you can call this controversial or not, such as vaccines. Um, and it's almost like let's say you're coming down from a psychedelic trip, and then there's more weirdness to deal with, trying to reorientate yourself. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I totally agree. I mean, I mean, for a long time, you can say that there's been aspects of modern media culture that have a psychedelic quality. There's a kind of emphasis on, you know, excess, lots of information, lots of connections, and increasingly there's more and more voices, more and more angles, more and more images, and the sense of a kind of other world, what we once called cyberspace, that is filled with all of these, you know, algorithms and non-human critters and things that are bringing. I mean, it's a very, very strange environment. Like if people from 20 years ago, you know, like the 20, for those of us who are older, the self you were 20 years ago, if they were brought forward and saw how you engage with media now, it would look kind of crazy. Like, whoa, people are, whoa, something happened here, you know, because we really are being interpolated into this post-human technology, information, media landscape in ways that's really fundamentally changing our sense of self, our sense of place, our sense of connection with other people, how we think, how we model reality, how we make political decisions. I mean, it's really an extraordinary transformation that we're in, and it's very discombobulating. And there's some very toxic elements to it. There's some very compulsive elements that we find ourselves wrestling with. And there's just a general sense that reality isn't quite what it used to be. It's not as solid. It's not as coherent. It's not as agreed upon. You know, where I'm walking down the street and I just don't really know, just like everybody has their own device and their own headphones or whatever, they're all in their own little ontologies. And maybe that was always sort of true, but it's just more obviously true now. And all of it is being weaponized. All of it. Every place you go, there's a manipulation on. You know, even the things that are best for you, there's still a, you know, a game. There's a a program, an attack, whatever it is. There's a lot going on, and so there is a quality of that weirdness that's just completely outside of psychedelics. That's just part of how we are navigating. And I feel like that the tightrope walker remains a valid model, even just for interacting with the world as such, where there's all these different people claiming different things. How do I know what I know? You know, I still have to make a decision, even though I may not really have the basis that I would like to make it from. And we're all being asked to make those decisions all the time. Do I do it by clutching on to a single belief system and demonizing all the people who disagree with me? I don't think that's the psychedelic way to do it. The psychedelic way to do it is to take responsibility for your confusion as well as for your capacities, and to do the best you can with a multidimensional awareness of how reality is woven together from multiple perspectives with multiple stories, different actors, humans, non-humans, machines, cosmic forces. They're all commingling into this moment. And I think it's asking us to be able to model navigating the world, the weird world we're in now, with some of those skills that I think are associated with at least aspects of psychedelic work.
Hmm. What comes up when you say that is in talking of that we all have different ontologies. For me, a psychedelic trip is a way to let's say bend that ontology and mess with it, and then the process of reintegration is to inspect that. And I as you say that, I think about how this has become a lot more volatile, because when you're coming down, you can find some Facebook group that is going to believe the ontology that you just experienced while you were on 400 mics of acid or something like that. So it's almost like there's a practice of, through the lens of psychedelia, psychedelic hygiene that is needed, considering how crazy this world is. And what I think about is Jamie Wheal from the Flow Genome Project. He talks about 3-bucket ontology. And you have your first bucket, which is your laws. It's the hard sciences, it's the gravity, it's the conventional wisdom that you've grown up with. That's a law that doesn't change, it stays in that bucket. You've got your second bucket, which is the hypothesis of. What was present for me is Charles Eisenstein. I've liked his writing, and it's resonated with me a lot. He's come up as a very smart guy, and he's been posing some very interesting things about QAnon and vaccines that really questions me, and that makes me sit in the hypothesis box, because I'm not ready to really put that in with my first box. And then the third one is the real sandbox of the weird. So it would be something like speaking to a DMT entity who tells you this is all a simulation and you're going to be jetted up on your 30th birthday, or something like that. I'm curious if you could speak to any, what we could say, psychedelic hygiene or processes in reintegration.
No, I really love that. Jamie's definitely a mate in this stuff, and we resonate with a lot of points. And I really appreciate you bringing up the example of Charles Eisenstein and some of the ways in which questioning the dominant story about vaccines and aspects of the QAnon world are actually important things to do, but that it's really important to remember like which of these baskets we're in. And just for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, the term ontology just really is talking about the way what makes things be. How do we think about what things are? What does it mean to say something is and something isn't? What's the extra thing that the is has? So, is there a conspiracy? Well, what kind of world is it where there is a conspiracy versus a world where there isn't? And the way in which everybody has a very different sense of how these fundamental categories about what the world are, how people have multiple versions of this, and that when we're going to altered states, and this is also true in meditation, where you go deep enough and you start to shift your sense of like, well, maybe, gee, normally it feels like I'm in here and I'm, kind of real, and there's a world out there, and it definitely sticks around. It's pretty real. And so that whole subject and object relationship seems to be a fundamental aspect of reality. But in deeper states of of meditation and occasionally with psychedelics, that very subject-object distinction melts down, and you're everything, or you're there, or you are the thought, or you are the object, you are the sunlight coming through the window. Well, that's like a shift in ontology that's very powerful. And what you're talking about is to be willing to say that things have different ways of being. You talk about those baskets. The law of gravity has a certain claim that Sherlock Holmes doesn't. But Sherlock Holmes isn't just like some weird figure you saw in your dream last night that nobody else has ever dreamed. You're the only one who's ever seen that particular strange beast that came out of a hillside in your dream last night. But Sherlock Holmes, we all know who Sherlock Holmes is. Sherlock Holmes has a certain claim on reality, and we can put him in a certain basket where we can put a lot of gods, a lot of myths, a lot of images, a lot of figures, a lot of fictions, you know, Gandalf, whatever. But that's not the same as gravity. It's a different basket. And a lot of people get into trouble when they reduce everything to the level of the law of gravity, where whatever weird thing or interesting thing or valuable story, it starts like, yes, it's got to be all part of the same world. Whereas to my mind, being aware that you have different frameworks is really key, so that, oh wait, this person is making a claim about how the virus is actually operating in our bodies. Okay, that's a basket one kind of claim. So I'm going to think about it in terms of basket one ways of thinking about things, which is like, does it have good evidence? What do other scientists say? Does this go against other things we know about natural law? And, you know, that you might not be a scientist, but you can still appreciate that it's those kinds of questions. But another kind of question is, is the spirit of the jungle waking up and spreading across the planet through the medium of ayahuasca? Maybe, but it's a different kind of question than the first one. And if you treat it differently, then you actually are starting to develop that facility, that ability to move between different frameworks, which to my mind is a key part of walking the tightrope, whether in psychedelic experience or in the world that we're in now. So that's one aspect of hygiene, is to recognize these different kind of baskets, and also include one where really weird stuff can happen. But you know what? Next day you wake up and you're like, I could start building a claim about reality based on all those synchronicities that happened last night. But nobody's making me do that. I don't have to do that, because all that I was really learning with those synchronicities was not that the world is actually controlled by higher dimensional forces, or that the world actually is it's already happened and we're just running through some kind of scenario, or that the world is a simulation running on some supercomputer. All of those kinds of belief stories that you might build off of your synchronicities are not necessary. The only claim that I would say is really important to truly affirm is that weird shit happens. That's it. Sometimes weird shit happens, but it doesn't mean you have to then add another story, another belief claim, and especially if you do, to not grip it and hold on to it as like your new solution to the existential crisis we're all facing as we try to figure out how to live, how to be, how to think, how to make decisions in the face of this extremely confusing, overwhelming, not going to get any easier phase of civilization that we're all riding. So that to me is a really key point, is to honor the most extreme experiences, to recognize them, to see them as fully part of your world, but to not mistake them and try to make them become foundations for that basket one baseline ontology world. And that's what you see with QAnon, where people get into a kind of mythology game that has facts in it, truths, both literal truths and what you could call allegorical truths. What do I mean by that? Well, you can say there is a tight organization of pedophiles running Hollywood, and they fill movies filled with symbols that are supposed to mind control us and keep us docile so they can keep their game going. Literally, that has absolutely no business in basket one. Are there pedophile rings or groups? Sure, it's been part of human history all the way through, and there's people doing good work that's much better than QAnon's work, actually trying to deal with the problem as best they can. It's a very difficult problem. But allegorically, there's something to be said for that. And like, well, what kind of values are being distributed through the media, through Hollywood films? Maybe there is a way in which we're being kind of controlled. It's not because they actually have mind control devices, but I don't know. I think I have some good reason to suspect some of the motivations behind the mainstream media that I consume. Well, that's kind of reasonable. That's kind of helpful. So one of the other ways about surfing these more outlandish scenarios is not to just go, oh, that's just BS. Oh, that's just a fiction. Oh, that's just some crazy idea. It's going like, actually, that might be an allegory or a symbol of another kind of truth that we really have to wrestle with. So the literal claims of a lot of anti-vaxxers about vaccinations, I don't believe are true. They don't belong in basket one. Do they tell us something very profound about how modern pharmaceutical industries have influence over the health industry and our own bodies and healing? Absolutely. Is that a dark story? Absolutely. Not absolutely in the sense that it isn't also a story of light and healing, and that's what makes it confusing. I think that's another way, another sign, I'll return to you, Tim. Another thing to watch in yourself is that when you go black and white, too black and white, in any situation, you're starting to kind of lose that multidimensional tightrope uprightness. As soon as you start really deep, now it doesn't mean you're not, whatever, that you don't hate Nazis. Go ahead and hate Nazis. Yes, that's a kind of polarization. I like people who aren't Nazis. I don't like Nazis. Fine. But overall, when you start to split into black and white, good and evil, and you don't recognize the complexities of things, then that's already a kind of warning sign. What I'm interested in is to be able to be upright and clear in the midst of complexities, confusions, ambiguity, ambivalence. And that is all aspects of psychedelic experience that really it can work out in our daily life. Doesn't mean that sometimes you have to make a clear decision and say no or yes. I'm not talking about that, but the worldview should have suppleness and lots of shades of gray so that you don't go, pharmaceutical industries, evil, natural healing mechanisms, good, which is of course just another industry with another set of media propagandistic tools. No, you're getting off, and that's what happens with QAnon, and it's a very satisfying way of being because it makes things much simpler. There's good, there's evil. I'm on the good side. We fight the evil side. I have a purpose in life, which is to fight the evil side. I don't reflect on myself and my own ignorance or my own bad motivations. It's easy to get there. There's going to be a lot of people in the future who do that. We haven't seen the end of this. But I think the psychedelic warrior position, which is another way of talking about what I'm saying, and by warrior, I don't mean violence or physical fighting. It's an attitude. And that the world of the weird is a world of danger as well as wonder. And that keeping these skills, whether in the psychedelic experience or in our normal reality, is a way of cultivating a certain kind of awake warriorship.
Thank you for that, because it's the literal versus allegorical is something that has been tension within me for a long time, because I can see the element of truth to all the to all the conspiracies that are catching the zeitgeist right now, and seeing that there is an element of truth and falsehood is really powerful there. I could refer, but I know you've got a hard stop, and I really want to get some of these questions answered. So Kenny, do you want to jump in and go to the questions?
Yeah, sure. The first up, so just a quick reminder, there we go. I see people are figuring out how to use the raise hands button. Yeah, now everyone's jumping in.
I want to answer one that came up on the chat because it's an important one.
Sure.
Is that cool?
If you saw something in there, go for it, man.
So Trevor said, QAnon, wrong, crazy, occult. These are all very satisfying beliefs. I wonder, how does this very same idea get into so many minds? So just kind of two questions. It's really the first part that I want to say. So you're looking at me and you're saying, hey, he doesn't sound like he's doing what he's talking about, because he's saying, although I didn't say crazy, but I did use the word cult at one point because it has some formal features with cults. It's important to make a distinction between using that language as a way to simply other and ignore and not deal with and demonize a part of society. And I don't believe I've been doing that. I've spent all year, much more time than probably you have, paying attention to conspiracy theory and QAnon and following it in and trying to understand where people are coming from. So when I say cult, I'm talking about like a sociological form, the way that we can say, whatever, like Nexium, where the dude was branding the ladies, like that's a cult. Your local Baptist church, not a cult. There's a difference there. What is that? Well, we can argue about it, but I'm using it in a sociological way, and I'm not just using it as a brand, or as a way to brand somebody. And I'm saying this partly to emphasize that the kind of openness that I'm talking about, that I'm trying to model, doesn't mean you don't make determinations. It doesn't mean you don't come to a place where you go, actually at this point, and I've been interested in conspiracy theories for a long time. At this point, right now, given the way the world is, I'm fully comfortable coming out and saying that this stuff is toxic. The way it's been spread, the way that it has broken up lives, broken up families, and brought violence into the capital is toxic. And I'm going to talk against it. But it's not because I'm just falling into a satisfying belief system where they're all idiots. It's about making determinations in the midst of confusion. So I think it's an important point to make, but now we'll hand it over to other questions.
Well, cool. Thank you. So first up is Elena. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. Just interesting point about QAnon. I read this week I heard on a radio show with a journalist that her theory was that QAnon is a creation of the US intelligence. Anyway, so there's conspiracy theories about the conspiracy theorists. But I'm wondering about how that relates to the larger secrecy within the US government and larger systems in the States, and the extensive intelligence apparatus in that country, and how that affects the individual's psyche and models of reality, and even psychedelic culture and individual trips.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's a real tough one, and I've been trying to take that question on, and I've yet to be satisfied with my answer, both for myself and for expressing it. And so I'm going to try it from a different angle, which is that, so one thing that's interesting about ayahuasca culture is that in the West, most people who, even if they, you go down and you stay there for a month or whatever, or you're doing it here, but you're really going into it. You're trying to get into the anthropological texture of it, with either with indigenous use or more often mestizo use, and there's some, Catholicism in there or whatever. There tends to be an emphasis on the healing and the benefit. A lot of people going down to the jungle don't recognize that black magic is absolutely inextricable from both traditional and mestizo ayahuasca culture. Black magic, evil darts, killing people, at least metaphorically and sometimes really. So one way of saying that, like going, well, so then we step back and we're going, so when we take in ayahuasca culture as a healing culture, what else is coming along with that? Do you think that somehow the modern world, with all of its toxicity and all of its illness and all of its violence and all of its disconnection, is going to somehow avoid the dark side in the midst of the ayahuasca experience? That it's not going to make its own version of evil darts and black magic? Of course it is. In that sense, black magic, and I'll make the connection to this in a second, is sort of inextricable from these zones. You can't get you want to avoid it or be clever about how you deal with it when it's in your face, but to pretend that it's not part of this zone is foolish. And we know this in the West, in our own psychedelic culture, because what is our primary psychedelic culture in the West? It's the culture of LSD. What is LSD? Well, LSD is simultaneously a divine sacrament, a not very good tool of mind control, a tool that resembles psychosis. All of these stories, and there's many more, they're all part of the picture. It's not like, no, LSD is just a sacred sacrament, or no, LSD is just good for concerts and having fun. It's also a mind control device, and every story we've told about it, every performance we've made with it is part of the field. And that means that the spooks are in there because they were tripping hard before we were even around. It's inextricable from the story of LSD. So now we go, okay, well, LSD, that's a different thing. Now we're talking about other substances, or, mushrooms are from nature, and ayahuasca and things like that. That's fine. But overall, we don't get out of the black magic problem. And it's a problem. There's not an easy solution. And so I'm using this kind of occult language because one way of understanding what intelligence agencies are and what they do is that they're playing a very sophisticated kind of magical game. And when I say that, I mean it in two ways. One is that they're actually playing with things behind the scenes. They're actually trying to put in spells, symbols, control mechanisms to make secrets that are hidden behind other secrets that are hidden behind other secrets, so that when you try to figure them out, you're going to get confused. If you ever watch stage magicians, for example, one of the things that stage magicians do is there's really often just a few basic tricks, but they build an elaborate story around the trick that gives it its particular flavor. And a lot of that intelligence game is building these kinds of stories. But another aspect of this world is what we believe and fear about it. Oh my God, they're controlling my mind. Oh, they're everywhere. They're absolutely in control of all of our media. Probably not, actually. They're probably also just, they're doing their thing, but there's other things that are doing their thing too. If I get too obsessed with the intelligence agencies, and it's particularly if I'm exploring altered states, well, there's going to be a kind of tendency of where I'm going to go and what kind of knowledge, what kind of information I'm going to come back with. So you can't pretend that's not there. It is there. And when you have to face it in front of you, it's part of our reality. The way that violence is part of our reality, the way that racism is part of US reality, whether we want it to be or not, it just is. And if you're dealing with it, you got to take it on. That aspect of the modern world, and of course it's not just restricted. If it was just the US government, you could demonize it. Totally. I mean, the CIA has just done horrible, horrible things. But it's not like the Russians don't have spooks and the Chinese don't have spooks. And they're all playing very intense games right now. So we are in a reality where there are multiple black magicians fighting each other through us. And that's terrifying. And you can devote yourself to trying to understand what's actually happening and do real research and keep that skepticism going, and have sip your conspiracy theories with have a little grain of salt always, but really try to go in there, and that's like a commitment. But if you're not going to do that, also remember that you have agency as you move through, because it's not completely determined. I don't believe it's completely determined. That in a way, the more you start to focus on it, the more power it gets, because it wants you to think it has that power. It's kind of like the emperor's no clothes situation. Like, advertisers want people to think that advertisers can totally control populations. They do to some degree. They do control. They do nudge. They do shape. We are the victims of propaganda, and some of our basic ideas about the world have been shaped through these kinds of forces. But it's complicated. There's multiple agents, there's multiple factors. Even within an organization like the CIA, there are multiple forces and agendas, just like any large corporation. People are fighting each other more than they're fighting the people outside. So when we start to imagine that the forces arrayed against us are these like absolutely impeccable, completely controlled master manipulators, when we have that fantasy, we're starting to fall into a fantasy. Because think about any institution that you actually know about, any place you work, being in school, university, small clubs, anything, any group environment you've been. What are some things that are in everyone? Rivalry, backstabbing, competition. All of those are parts of what happens when humans come together. Those are also parts of individual intelligence agencies and interagency rivalries and rivalries between different countries. So it's a very chaotic field, and one that we should not ever believe is somehow unified and controlling us from one particular perspective. So these are ways of trying to sort of not deny the problem, but also not deny the agency you have, and to remember that in a way, black magic is always part of the picture. And that's part of where we come to healing, even in the face of it, rather than pretending it's not there.
Yeah, it's like the molecule itself is a trickster, right?
That is definitely, for me, that's an important way of thinking about it.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. That's a great answer.
Great. So I know, Erik, you got to leave pretty soon. I'm going to go with the next, basically Erik's got to wrap it up in about 3 minutes. So Paul, you got the first slot since you asked first. So apologies in advance for people we can't get to it. But Paul, go ahead.
Wow, so I'll keep it, I'm glad I have short questions here. I just have 2 quick questions. Well, I don't know if they're quick for you, but one, I appreciate everything saying. I really align with your perspective. And my questions are, what advice or what things have you found that help people go from that literalized interpretation to the metaphorical one? What helps in that? And question number 2, how do you feel psychological framing overlaps or relates to the high weirdness phenomenon?
When you say psychological framing, what do you mean?
So you could take an experience of, say, like an entity you had in a DMT experience, and that could be a representation of your unconscious mind coming up, and it could be something that your unconscious mind is telling you about the outside world.
Absolutely. No, I totally understand. Yeah, those are the first one is it's a tough one. It comes up a lot in these conversations I've been having. For me, the best thing is to model. You not necessarily to argue, but there are, depending on what kind of conversation levels you are, there are ways of dropping certain kinds of questions in someone's mind for him to loosen up their hold. But it's hard to loosen up. You kind of have to do it yourself. You kind of have to sort of see that, wait, what happens if I let this one go a little bit? Oh, it doesn't look so clear. Okay, I have to go through that. So in a way, it's just about remaining friendly and open and modeling an upright, intelligent, well-crafted life that doesn't literalize everything. And so it's a real case-by-case situation. As for the other one, this is a major question. This is a major question, and it's particularly notable with challenging experiences or particularly challenging entities, because it's not very hard to go out and find ontologies, frameworks within psychedelic work where people are going to say, those things are aspects of yourself. If you have a difficult experience, go into it. If you are terrified, try to embrace it, try to go through it, don't quaver. But particularly if we want to take indigenous world models very seriously, there's also something to be said for their independence, their own status as agents, which is that's the non-psychological move, where it's like, well, actually part of this world that I'm in, whatever this world is, seems to be animated with different kinds of agents, and I'm interacting with these, but they're not just features of me, and that kind of narcissism of psychology. And so those are very different approaches. And I'm afraid to say that I think that the thing itself, the experiences themselves, are asking us to not be able to resolve that. It's not a very satisfying answer, but I believe that if you resolve it, that there are problems that happen if you resolve it too tightly either way. So if you don't resolve it either way, and you recognize that sometimes that monster is my own unconscious, fear of my father, and sometimes that monster is just something nasty I just need to kind of shimmy by, leave that one in the trick. We'll deal with that later. That's probably the better way of going about it, whereas just embracing it might have actually been a bum ride with real consequences. I think that we kind of have to do both, and it's a very unsatisfying answer. But I think that, again, that psychedelics, I believe, are better seen as tools and experiences that help us deal with multiplicity and complexity rather than truth drugs. Like the CIA thought they were truth serums. It's like they're not truth serums. They're tricksters who bring healing. But that we want to kind of maintain that openness, and I think that's true about psychology in general. I think there's a danger to over psychologizing, even if it is often the first stage or even the second, third stage of going through personal challenges. But there are other ways in which you go, I don't want to take I'm just going to figure out how to get around this one, maneuver it, not take responsibility, not get into it. And so I think that even in ordinary psychology, there's sort of a difference between absorbing and integrating and just like getting by, sneaking by.
Erik, thank you so much for your time. I know we've already gone along and there's a lot of people wanting to talk to you. So thank you, everyone. I highly recommend this book. It's available at Banyan Bookstore in Kitsilano. It really underlines a lot of the principles that we've been talking today, and it's kind of documents it through a very interesting biography of 3 characters in the 70s. So I recommend that. Erik, I believe you also have a series of Ask Dr. D, or you have some new subscription. Do you want to talk about that?
Currently I'm like a lot of people, I'm experimenting with different ways of communicating in our mediascape, and I've been using Substack, and Substack is basically it's an email newsletter that I'm using to write a lot of current articles, and a lot of them are about conspiracy and psychedelics and alternative religion, and a lot of them are sort of through a California West Coast lens. And anyway, the name of that is Burning Shore. So burningshore.com will get you that. And you can just sign up for free. But it's also, the nice thing about Substack is it's designed to allow writers to actually make some money, because some of the people who sign up, they'll chip in and get a few extra yummies. And so that's the current experiment. And I also have a huge archive of talks and podcasts and articles going back 25 years on my other site called Techgnosis, TECHGNOSIS.com. But Burning Shore is where the action is for me right now.
Awesome. Kenny, you want to take us away?
Thank you so much, Erik and Tim, for that. It was really, really excellent. Erik, thanks so much for your time. I know you got to go, so you can sign off whenever you're ready.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate your being a guest with us.
Good luck.
All right. So thanks everyone. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everyone's questions. I guess I don't know if you can reach out to Erik on any social media or anything, or on his website or something, to ask anything else. Unfortunately, we only had that much time with him. So as mentioned, we're going to roll into the breakout sessions. We're going to usually give everyone probably 2-3 minutes for a little bio break, grab a drink, go to the bathroom, do whatever you got to do. So gonna just take a quick pause, and while we're on break, you'll notice that things will kind of go a little haywire on your Zoom, and you'll end up in a room with a handful of people there. So if you are not interested in participating in the breakout rooms, please leave now. It helps me to get the breakouts correct and accurate. So again, if you're not, thanks for joining. But if you want to stay in the breakouts, just do nothing, and you will end up in one in a few minutes. So thanks again for everyone who says goodbye, and thank you for coming. And for anyone who wants to hang, just take a minute to get yourself settled, and we'll be back in a few minutes.